Welcome to today's session. In today's session, we are going to talk about the circle of Willis. So, when we talk about the circle of Willis, we normally refer to a network of arteries which are found at the base of the brain that provide a critical pathway for the blood flow, ensuring that there is continuous supply of blood to the brain itself. Even if one part of the vascular system is compromised, it makes sure that the brain receives as much blood as possible. Now, the circle of Willis, it also serves as a safety mechanism. For example, as it allows blood to flow through the brain, it can also help prevent ischemic damage to the brain, because blood can still flow to the same portion by using other different blood vessels in the brain itself. Hence, we talk about this important structure which is known as the circle of Willis. Now, when it comes to the circle of Willis, we look at the main blood supply to the circle of Willis itself. The first main blood supply of the circle of Willis is the internal carotid artery. So the internal carotid artery, which is this structure here, of course we have another one. These are the main supplies of blood to the circle of Willis. The internal carotid artery is found, like you can see on the picture, on each side of the circle of Willis, and these arteries, they arise from the common carotid artery and supply most of the anterior portion of the circle of Willis. Apart from that, we also have the vertebral arteries, and these are the vertebral arteries here. And when we talk about the vertebral arteries, they are also found on each side of the circle of Willis, and this mainly arises from the subclavian arteries, and they come together to form what is known as the basilar artery. And the vertebral arteries, they normally supply the posterior portion of the circle of Willis as compared to the internal carotid arteries. Now, the major arteries that comprise the circle of Willis also includes what is known as the anterior cerebral arteries. So the anterior cerebral arteries, they also complete the full formation of the circle of Willis. And these anterior cerebral arteries, they branch off from the internal carotid arteries, and they supply the frontal lobes of the brain. They are connected to each other by the anterior communicating artery, which is this particular portion here, of course. Now, apart from that, the anterior communicating artery itself, this one is just a short artery, like you can see on the diagram, which connects the left and the right anterior cerebral arteries, forming the frontal portion of the circle of Willis. From there, we have, of course, the internal carotid arteries, which I talked of. These enter the circle of Willis from each side, connecting anteriorly to the anterior cerebral artery, and posteriorly to the posterior communicating artery. Then we have the posterior communicating arteries. So the posterior communicating arteries, they are here. And when we talk of the posterior communicating arteries, these, they connect the internal carotid arteries to the posterior cerebral arteries, forming the side of the circle. Now, when we talk about the posterior cerebral arteries themselves, these are the posterior cerebral arteries. We have the posterior cerebral arteries here, and another one is there. So when we talk of the posterior cerebral arteries, these arteries branch from the basilar arteries, and they supply the occipital lobe and the posterior part of the brain itself. They complete the posterior section of the circle of Willis. Then from there, we now have what is known as the basilar artery. And the basilar artery basically is just formed by the merging of the vertebral arteries. The basilar arteries themselves, these will now supply blood to the posterior cerebral arteries, and this will help linking the vertebral system to the circle of Willis itself. Now, using this same particular pathway, we see that blood of course will flow throughout the circle of Willis in a following manner. Blood is going to flow upward from the internal carotid artery on each side, and each internal carotid artery splits into the middle cerebral arteries, which isn't part of the circle, but they supply a significant portion of the brain. And the anterior cerebral artery itself also does not form part of the circle of Willis, but they help supply blood to the rest of the body. Now, from the left and the right anterior cerebral arteries, if you're able to take note of these structures that I was circling there, the right and the left anterior cerebral arteries are connected by the anterior communicating artery, and this allows blood to flow across the anterior part of the circle of Willis. And blood from the basilar artery flows into the posterior cerebral artery. While when we look at the posterior communicating arteries, they will allow blood to flow between the internal carotid system and the posterior cerebral arteries, and this will help connect the anterior and posterior portion of the circle of Willis. And now, when we talk of the circle of Willis, basically that is how blood flows. So why do we need to make sure that we have a well-functioning circle of Willis? One of the points is that the circle of Willis is crucial to maintain adequate blood flow to all regions of the brain. Hence, we need it to be functioning to be in a good state. Apart from that, sometimes if there are variations or anomalies in the circle of Willis, this may easily cause an incomplete circulation of blood to the portion of the brain. And when there is that incomplete circulation of blood to a portion of the brain, then this person goes into ischemic stroke. And particularly if the blockage occurs in an area where the blood cannot use any other route apart from that route, or where there is joining of two arteries and the blockage is there, meaning blood cannot use any other route, meaning at this moment what we'll end up seeing is a stroke, because the blood will fail to circulate a particular portion of the brain. Apart from that, a malfunctioning circle of Willis can also result in aneurysms, which often occur, particularly at the branching points due to high blood pressure and of course blood flow changes. So basically, when we talk of the circle of Willis, it is a highly functional arterial cycle rather, which plays a key role in cerebral circulation, and this will ensure that the brain remains supplied with blood by providing alternative routes for blood flow, and this will in turn help protect the brain against damage from blockage, arterial issues, and any other complications that may easily arise in the brain if we had a normal system of blood flow and not the cycle of Willis. So for today, that's all. Till next time, goodbye.